Hello again, guys. It is I700. We are back with Valiant Salvor, Chapter 5, New Origins. Here we go. The dark blue room had been quiet for the past few hours. The boys slept, some of them snoring loudly, but all of them too deep into rest to hear it. The corpse of Crass was barely existent, his ribs pried open with tatters of gnawed-on skin dangling from it. Legs and arms scattered among the boys in the room. The marrow of his bones sucked out as some of the boys used his bones as pacifiers to soothe themselves of the harsh environment they are now in. With all organs, marrow, and blood gone, all that was left was the crimson stains on the brass room and on the skin of every boy who participated in this feast. Jorg was clean, having no blood, partaking in none of the savagery. Numid had blood on his hands and mouth, being able to only wrestle away the left hand of Crass from another group of boys. Bonnet, having a whole shin for himself, he used the head of the tibia as a popsicle, sucking on it, draining the marrow out, and soothing himself for the night. Even as he slept, it stayed in his cheeks, sucking still. Endura, however, indulged himself in the flesh. The whole leg he had acquired he ate ferociously before the other kids came around to the idea of cannibalism. All that he left was tendons and bones, so that way other kids won't be jealous of how much he procured, as they took what morsel was left from him, so they too can enjoy the marrow and the tiny fragments of flesh that was still remaining. All bared some semblance of cannibalism except for Jorg. All had given in to this new environment to survive, except for him. The lights turn on. The bright light turning the dark blue room into its original brass color. Light footsteps can be heard entering the room, followed by the thudding noises of armored footsteps. The four slaves enter with cleaning supplies, cleaning up all the excrement off the floors left by the boys. One slave kneeled right in front of the hallway that they just came through to pick up some remains of poor Crass. This was the slave who was most eager to grab the girls, the one who grabbed the youngest and most likely violated her first amongst the thousands of slaves throughout the ship. All the boys wake up. Fear and guilt crept over the boys who were covered in blood, unable to hide what they had done. Others already thinking of 1,000 excuses for it not being their fault. The Marine entered, walking high and mighty into the room, never taking a sweeping glance around the room. He walked like a lion amongst hyenas. A fatal crack is heard, followed by intense screaming. The Marine had in his stride stepped and smashed the bones of his own slave's shins, paying absolutely no mind to the slave's crying and screaming of pain he was going through, now having his legs utterly crushed from the sheer weight and size of the power boot that landed on him. The boys were in shock. Here, all illusions they may have had, thinking themselves higher and more superior to the slaves, were utterly shattered. The Marine showed something to the boys that they will forever learn. Their lives do not matter. The other slaves look up immediately upon the screaming and witness what has transpired. Shock was not the emotion they displayed, but instead annoyance, as if this has happened several times before. Jorg was most stunned by what had happened. Bonnet's bone pieces fell out of his mouth. Endura was annoyed, wishing that the screaming slave would just stifle his cries. My lord, I need help. You crushed my legs. Dispose of him. I can't allow such stupidity in this room. It might rub off on the recruits. Take him away. The Marine sits down upon his altar as the slaves hurry about their work and rush to drag the slave, who is screaming still, out to the hall. The Marine sees now, as he scans around the room, the tattered corpse of Crass, the blood stains on the boys' bodies. Jorg, the pale, clean one of the group. Jorg slowly glides himself up the wall, standing, bracing to speak out and report what has transpired here at night. The three boys who commit the act, Dumo the leader, Raham and Hork, the two followers. The murderers of poor Crass. Jorg takes few steps forward on the cold brass floor. As he approaches, Endura watches as the events unfold. Here, 3 boys could be punished, and everyone else would be given some form of lesser punishment for their desecration upon Crass.
Excuse me, sir. While you were away and the lights were out, those 3 boys...
Jorg points at the group, some of them slowly distancing themselves from one another.
They did the smart thing. Yes, I know.
The Space Marine acknowledged the deed, like as if it was natural.
I know why they did it. It's something I too did when I was training. The lesson is, don't let the weak take that which can benefit the strong, lest you succumb to their weakness. Don't take that which you aren't strong enough to keep. That boy was an idiot, taking so much food for himself, and those 3 followed the right course of action. You would do well to follow their example. Also,
he cuts and turns, facing Endura.
You are the smartest one in the group. You waited for them to do the hard work and picked up the largest portion. Smart, indeed. Profit off of their work will get you far. Maybe even commander someday.
The words of admiration hit Endura's chest like 1,000 pounds of bricks. Never has he gotten such praise. Here he was just following his instincts, doing what he believes is right, and receiving compliments for just being him for once. Jorg, on the other hand, was much the opposite. His face turned to horror, looking at poor Crass, the boy who only wished to eat, and could have been prevented, had there been more food provided to the boys. He gazes up at the 3 boys he just ratted out, their faces turned to hatred for what Jorg just tried to do to them. Dumo was already looking at his 2 companions, and all 3 of them shook their heads in agreement with one another, that they now had a target to deal with. Someone in the group that was needing to be culled. The Marine gazes on and sees the 3 slaves carrying the buckets of food and water for the morning meal. He sighs in annoyance, again, at their existence.
Go take that 1 slave from Armin's retinue. I won't waste time as you 3 incompetent fools try doing tasks with less help.
Are you sure, my lord? Armin might be less forgiving for our trespass.
The slave spoke.
He touches any one of you, I will take more from him. Now go, and don't question me again, you groveling weakling. I saw you in the pits. You tried breeding those girls I gave you, and even though you had first chance, you were shoved out of the way by the lesser slaves. Pathetic. And yet question me as if you have any right to talk to a higher being like me.
The slave backs away, slithering back like a snake with his head low, running with the other 2 to go retrieve this other slave. While that is going on, Raham pulls a rib from the carcass, showing it to his leader Dumo. Dumo, without saying much, agrees to the idea with a small gesture. Raham holds the broken sharp rib under his palm, difficult to hide when one has no clothes. Endura kept a watchful eye, though, and is taking notes on who to spar with today. Numid was weak with his broken ribs that he was trying to conceal, but the massive purple marks on his side were a dead giveaway that he was wounded, trying to pretend like he is fine after being ganged up by 4 boys and kicked down the altar from the bucket of nourishment yesterday. Endura also saw Raham grab the broken rib and hide it in his hand. Endura knew who that rib was meant for, but didn't like the idea of that person dying just yet. Despite all of Jorg's incessant whining, he was a kind boy, a good boy, just not adapting to this new environment. Despite all of Endura's mocking and laughing at Jorg's inability to cope, he knew Jorg didn't deserve this fate of dying in a place filled with cruelty. As much as Jorg ignored Endura's position as an outcast, constantly being mistreated by the rest of the tribe, Endura knew that if he was in Jorg's position, he would have done worse than ignore Endura's situation. So to return that kindness, Endura just wanted to get Jorg stronger and cruel enough to survive, even as a slave. After all, Jorg did beg for Endura's help on the Thunderhawk. Problem is that the only way to help Jorg is to let him suffer for now, until he rises like a dark phoenix, reflecting back the cruelty of the world that they just stepped in. The slaves reappear with a new member and carrying the rest of the buckets of sludge and water. Everyone lines up again, but this time not out of order, but instead lined up eyeing on who deserves the most nutrition compared to who should not eat at all. Numid was last, Endura and the three murderers were first. Endura, being no fool, decides to consume only a fourth of the buckets, as that was enough for him despite his stomach craving more. He decided now isn't the time to indulge, as there are older boys who are much more developed. The other three, having eaten crass, didn't feel too hungry, so they took the same amount as Endura. Jorg's turn was next. This time, though, instead of Endura walking away and into a corner to see all the possible events and threats, this time, Endura stayed next to the pair of buckets that Jorg was approaching. Jorg looked quizzical as to why Endura was there, as was the other boys. Endura grabs Jorg's arm, tugging him close, and whispers, "They plan to kill you. Eat as much as you need, but not so much as to piss everyone else off." Jorg tries looking back, but is tugged to look forward by Endura. "Don't draw attention to yourself if you wish to live. If vengeance is what you seek for Crass, you won't get it by being this tattletale. Eat and drink, then stay near me." The Marine hears what is being whispered. His augmented ears help him. The kids don't see it, but he smiles under his helmet, eager to see the brawl ahead. Smelling the broken rib in Raham's hand, he knows what will be coming. Endura walks past the three killers. They are unsure what to make of him, whether he was threatening Jorg or helping him. But Dumo suspects Endura is after his own end, not realizing that Endura is in fact onto their plan yet again. Jorg finishes and walks directly to Endura's side on the opposite end of the killers. Jorg is unsure where he finds himself. Either ignore what atrocity has been committed, or die pointlessly, no step closer to bringing justice and honor to his fallen tribe. Numid and Bonnet approach the buckets last. Bonnet, pretty full from last night's surprise meal, just takes the last drops of water and sludge. He looks at Numid and sees the damage on his side. Bonnet, being younger, takes up the advantage that lays before him. Seeing that Numid's bucket had a slight line of sludge left, Bonnet rushed in, jamming his palm into Numid's side and using his shoulder to push Numid off the altar again, as he takes the last bit of sludge. The boys watched as Numid cries on the floor and squealed in pain from Bonnet's strike to his side. Endura leans over to Jorg's ear. "See how the soldiers that attacked our village hold no loyalty to one another? Do you see how the young and fair Bonnet just took down that rat Numid? You need to start thinking like they do." Jorg just gazed in disgust, but couldn't deny the truth of what just happened. All loyalties and family ties are lost to the children. It's only been 2 days and already the fight for survival is all that matters.
Okay, form up and start fighting. Afterwards, we will dispose of the dead and go over education.
The boys gazed at each other, who to fight and who to kill. Bonnet already distinguished himself, so no one would kill him out of respect. But Jorg was the only one who fought only when attacked, never initiating the fight. All eyes were on him, the eyes of predators looking at their next prey. Dumo head gestured at Raham while gazing at Jorg. Raham lined up with Jorg. Jorg was put at unease by the looks he was getting. To feel so helpless, to feel like a worm waiting for the nearest bird to snatch his life away. Jorg did not like this at all. All this feeling like his life is in others' hands. He was on the verge of tears from the adrenaline coursing through his body. He felt like he needed to run, but there was nowhere to go in this room, so he had to fight. Endura steps in front of Jorg, gazing that predatory look into Raham's eyes. Raham snarling in annoyance that Endura would defend such a coward. No words were spoken amongst the group. but all understood what had happened. Endura had claimed Jorg. None would trespass on Jorg without him knowing. Endura looked at Jorg and looked at Hork, gesturing his head at Jorg to engage with Hork. Jorg just nods and walks one step to the side, facing the smallest of the group, but still a tough fight ahead, as Jorg's body is still reeling from the lack of nourishment from last night. Duma was paired up to fight with another kid, but he kept his eyes on what was happening between Jorg and Endura.
Fight!